Imagine, for a second, just imagine a scenario where your nation's ultimate symbol of security is completely, and I mean utterly, reduced to ashes.
Right.
I want you to really picture it. And, don't just think of it as some sort of historical hypothetical. Really put yourself in that
Yeah,
headspace.
it's hard to do.
It is, but maybe it's a Capitol building that represents like centuries of unshakable democracy. Or maybe it's a religious headquarters, a place you've been taught literally since childhood is protected by the divine.
Protect you.
Exactly. Or perhaps it's this monument of invincibility that defines your entire cultural and national identity. Now, I want you to imagine waking up, walking outside, and it is just rubble. Just smoking, charred, completely silent rubble.
Yeah.
How does a society even begin to process the collapse of what they genuinely thought was indestructible?
Well, I mean, it is a total cognitive and existential collapse. Because when the physical structures that anchor your worldview are just annihilated, the psychological fallout it's unimaginable. You aren't just losing buildings in that moment, right? You are losing your fundamental understanding of how the universe operates.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
For the ancient mind especially, the destruction of a sacred center wasn't just, a political defeat. It wasn't just losing a war. It meant the cosmos itself was coming undone.
Right.
Like the sky was literally falling.
Exactly. Okay, so let's unpack this, because today's deep dive takes us into this staggering historical and theological document.
It really is staggering.
It is. We are looking at a text titled The Fall of Judah, Jerusalem is Destroyed by Chris R. Velasquez. And we're also pulling from a stack of incredibly detailed infographic sources that track the exact anatomy of this whole phenomenon.
The visual data is super helpful.
So helpful. We are zooming in on one of the darkest, honestly most pivotal moments in ancient history, which is the year 586 BC. But I want to be really clear right up front to everyone listening. We aren't just looking at this as some dusty ancient tragedy for, history buffs.
Right. It's not just a museum exhibit.
No, not at all. We are extracting the core insights from these sources to explore this as a masterclass on the dangers of false security and the limits of divine patience and the actual step-by-step anatomy of societal collapse.
And that is really the perfect lens for this material. Because what we are looking at in 586 BC is a profound collision.
A collision, I like that.
Yeah, it is the exact moment where covenant privilege clashed fatally with covenant accountability.
Oh, that's heavy.
It is, and this wasn't, a sudden or random historical accident. The sources make it undeniably clear that this was the catastrophic intersection of a people who believed they were utterly immune to consequence and a God who is fundamentally not sentimental about corruption.
Not sentimental about corruption. Wow. Okay, so we know that Jerusalem fell. The history books, both secular and biblical, they are very clear on that point.
Indisputable, yeah.
But before we figure out the why, before we really get into the psychology and the theology of the collapse, I think we need to establish the sheer scale of the devastation. We need to feel the weight of it.
We do. We did to sanitize these things.
We totally do. And the data points from our infographic sources, they paint just a terrifying picture of this historical catastrophe. So the year is 586 BC. The Babylonian Empire, led by King Nebuchadnezzar, lays this suffocating siege to Jerusalem.
Suffocating is the right word.
Right. We're talking about absolute protracted brutality here. The sources detail severe famine, just widespread terror, and total internal collapse. And then more than 10,000 people are exiled.
Which is a massive number for that time.
Just imagine the logistics of that. 10,000 people taken from their homes, completely stripped of their autonomy, and marched across the unforgiving terrain of the ancient Near East.
It's a death march, essentially.
Basically, yeah. And the temple, the one singular temple of the Lord, this architectural marvel built by Solomon, it is completely destroyed. It is burned straight to the ground. And the resulting exile lasts for roughly 70 years.
Yeah, the physical devastation was just absolute. And we really have to pause here and consider what a Babylonian siege actually meant in real terms.
Please, yeah, lay it out for us.
They didn't just show up and conquer the city in a weekend. That's not how ancient warfare worked. A siege was designed to break the human spirit before the walls were even breached.
Right, it's psychological warfare.
Exactly. They cut off the food, they cut off the water, the commerce, everything. The famine described in the historical accounts is visceral. I mean, we are talking about people starving in the streets, society completely turning on itself.
I read some of those accounts in the prep, and it's horrifying what people will do when they are starving.
It's the darkest parts of human nature coming out. And when they finally broke through those massive city walls,
Hmm.
they didn't just, you know, occupy the city and set up a new government. They systematically dismantled the infrastructure of Judean identity.
They erased it.
Yes. They burned the temple, yes, but they also destroyed the royal palace. They intentionally tore down the civic structures, and they carried off the sacred temple vessels, which was basically the ancient equivalent of parading your conquered enemy's gods through the streets.
Up saying, our God is bigger than your God.
Exactly that. And they completely disrupted the priesthood. This was an active, deliberate erasure of Judah as a functioning kingdom.
And I think nothing captures that erasure quite like the tragic, honestly harrowing end of the Davidic line.
Oh, man. Yeah.
I really want to spend a minute on this because the sources highlight the fate of Zedekiah. He's the last king of Judah, and the text notes that he attempts to flee the siege under the cover of night.
Desperation move.
Total desperation. But he is pursued, and he's captured by the Babylonian army. And the punishment Nebuchadnezzar inflicts is chillingly psychological. It's not just a standard execution.
It's so much worse.
It really is. Zedekiah's sons are slaughtered right in front of him.
Right.
And then his eyes are put out. The very last visual image Zedekiah ever processes in his entire life is the murder of his own children, the violent end of his lineage.
It is just incredibly brutal.
And then he is dragged in bronze chains all the way to Babylon. I mean, we read these things in ancient texts and sometimes gloss over them, but the trauma of that moment is staggering.
It is an almost unbearable image, and the text emphasizes it for a very specific reason. The line of David, you have to understand, wasn't just a political dynasty. It carried this massive theological promise.
The promise that his throne would last forever.
Right. God had promised David that his throne would endure forever.
Yeah.
So when Zedekiah is blinded and dragged away in chains, it represents the visible political reign ending in total humiliation. The city of David is reduced to a charred shell.
Huh.
You have a few of the poorest people left in the land just to work the vineyards. But the nation-state, as they knew it, is completely over. It's a full stop in history.
See, this is where I have to push back a little, or at least, voice the cognitive dissonance that any Judean believer at the time must have been screaming into the void.
Yeah, I'm sure they were.
Because this is like watching a seemingly invincible dynasty not just lose an election or even lose a war, but be completely erased from the map. But wait, wasn't this God's chosen city?
That was the belief.
So how does a believer process their God, allowing a foreign pagan empire to torch his own house? Because if I'm an ancient Babylonian looking at this, I'm thinking, my God, Marduk, just absolutely beat your God, Yahweh.
Well, what's fascinating here is that the biblical framework entirely rejects the idea that God was defeated. The Babylonians weren't defeating Yahweh.
Okay, then what was happening?
Our sources explicitly state that God was withdrawing in judgment.
Withdraw?
Yes. The visible unraveling of the nation-state was actually the physical manifestation of a broken covenant. Babylon was merely the instrument. Think of them as the scalpel used to cut out the rot.
Or a sledgehammer?
A sledgehammer works too. The destruction wasn't a sign of God's weakness. It was a demonstration of his terrifying holiness. The visible sign of God's presence left the house because the house had been deeply, irreparably defiled from the inside out.
Which means, if God allowed this to happen, if he actually orchestrated it as a judgment, it definitely didn't happen overnight.
Definitely not.
You don't just wake up one Tuesday and find your invincible city in ashes because of one bad decision. It prompts the obvious question, what was rotting beneath the floorboards of this society?
A lot of things.
Because to cause a collapse of this magnitude, the foundation must have been completely eaten through by termites.
Oh, it was a very long road to disaster. The sources highlight that 586 BC was preceded by centuries of prophetic warning, royal compromise, and just continuous covenant breach.
Centuries, so this was a slow burn.
Very slow. Now, we should add some nuance here, because Judah was a bit different from the northern kingdom of Israel, which had fallen much earlier. Judah actually had some reforming kings.
Right, like Hezekiah.
Yeah, leaders like Hezekiah and Josiah who really tried to steer the ship back on course.
Right, I saw that in the notes. But the text is pretty clear that those reforms were superficial, right? They were partial and temporary. It kind of reminded me of, like, painting over water damage instead of fixing the leaky pipe inside the wall.
That is a brilliant way to put it. They were top-down reforms. A king like Josiah would decree that the idols be smashed and the law be read aloud, and the people would comply outwardly.
Because the king said so.
Exactly. But it never fully penetrated the heart of the culture. It was compliance, not transformation. These reforms were constantly being undermined by the surrounding cultural corruption.
So the disease was still there.
The deep systemic problem remained. The people maintained all the outward religious forms, the ceremonies, the rituals, but they tolerated severe spiritual disloyalty in their actual day-to-day lives.
So let's break down what that spiritual disloyalty actually looked like, because the sources get very specific about the diseases infecting the society. It wasn't just a generic, vague sense of, oh, they were bad people.
No, it was highly specific.
We are talking about widespread idolatry and spiritual syncretism. And for anyone listening who might be rusty on the term, syncretism is basically mixing the worship of Yahweh with the worship of foreign gods.
Blending it all together.
Right, it's like a hedge fund approach to religion. You don't necessarily abandon God, you just diversify your portfolio.
I love that analogy, diversifying the spiritual portfolio.
You worship Yahweh on the Sabbath, but you also offer a little something to the fertility god on Tuesday, just in case you need good crops.
Just hedging your bets.
Exactly. The text calls it spiritual adultery. But it wasn't just religious offenses, was it? Because the sources point heavily to the social justice aspects of the rot.
Yes, and this is a crucial connection that modern readers, I think, often miss. The prophets, figures like Isaiah, Micah, Jeremiah, they explicitly link the spiritual rot to social rot. You simply cannot separate the two in the biblical worldview.
They are completely intertwined.
Completely. The sources cite Isaiah 1, Micah 3, and Jeremiah 5, pointing to bloodshed, violence, and the systematic exploitation of the poor. The leadership was deeply corrupt, and injustice just pervaded the entire land.
That's so heavy.
And here's the mechanism behind that. When your trust shifts from the Lord to idols and political alliances, your morality shifts too. You stop seeing other people as bearers of the divine image, and you start seeing them as commodities.
As things to be used.
Right. The moral fabric of the society disintegrated, and they began treating vulnerable people as completely disposable.
And yet, here is the craziest part of human psychology to me. While they are actively exploiting the poor in the streets and bowing to other gods on the hilltops, they still felt completely secure.
It's wild.
It brings us to a specific phrase from the text that I found incredibly compelling. The people treated the temple like a talisman.
Yes, a magic charm.
They literally used a slogan. Jeremiah 7 records them chanting, "This is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord." They used this physical building as a magical shield, a false security policy.
It was completely irrational.
If you think about it like a modern bank vault, it's like they believed the thick stone walls and the heavy steel door of their religious rituals protected the gold of God's favor. And they were completely ignoring the fact that they had left the vault door wide open from the inside by their social injustices.
It was the ultimate delusion. They really believed that sacred space could protect rebellious hearts. They thought they could manipulate the divine through geography and architecture.
But it's like they thought they had a divine get-out-of-jail-free card just because of their zip code. Like, God lives here, so we can do whatever we want, exploit whoever we want, and he won't let the city fall because it would make him look bad. Is this just ancient arrogance, or is this a fundamental part of human nature?
Oh, it's human nature.
Because if you look at human history, we seem so wired to want the benefits of proximity to the divine without any of the demands of it.
It is deeply, stubbornly embedded in human nature.
Yeah.
And it's addressed perfectly in Principle D from our source text. Religious forms without obedience become empty.
Principle D, right.
This is a profound psychological and theological truth. The people assumed that because they had the temple, because they had the sacrifices, they were categorically safe. But external signs of religion without an inward faithful heart actually become liabilities, not protection.
Liabilities. So meaning having the temple actually made their situation worse.
Much worse. Because it breeds presumption. A temple without repentance isn't a refuge. It becomes a witness against the unfaithful. Think about it. If you know what the good is, and you have the institutions that represent the good, and you still consciously choose corruption, your guilt is magnified.
You know better.
Exactly. The destruction of the temple was the necessary collapse of a false theology of automatic security. The lesson the sources draw here is incredibly painful for anyone who relies on institutional legacy. Sacred institutions cannot shelter rebellion.
That is a stark warning.
The burning of the temple proved once and for all that God will not be manipulated by external forms.
Okay, so the people were rebelling. They were relying on a building instead of a relationship, and they were exploiting the vulnerable. But as we said earlier, they weren't doing this in a vacuum.
No, they had plenty of heads up.
They were warned constantly. So let's transition to the messengers they aggressively ignored, because the concept of the point of no return is a major theme in this deep dive.
The role of the prophets just cannot be overstated in this narrative. The prophets weren't just, fortune tellers predicting the future. They were prosecuting attorneys for the covenant.
Prosecuting attorneys. I like that framing.
You have figures like Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Ezekiel standing as these lonely, often despised witnesses, pleading for decades for the people to repent. I mean, Jeremiah is literally standing right at the temple gate, interrupting their religious festivals, shattering their illusions, and warning them that Babylon will be God's instrument of judgment if they don't change their ways.
And the imagery the prophets use to communicate this is terrifying. It's not subtle at all.
No, they were very direct.
The sources mention Ezekiel's vision specifically from Ezekiel chapters 10 and 11. Now, Ezekiel was actually taken into exile a few years before the final destruction of the city in 586 BC. And while he's in Babylon, he has this incredible, tragic vision.
It's one of the most haunting passages in the text.
He sees the glory of the Lord physically departing from the temple in Jerusalem. The presence of God moves away from the threshold, hovers over the cherubim, and eventually leaves the city entirely, moving out to the east.
Just packing up and leaving.
And the crucial detail here is that this happens before the Babylonians burn it down.
Yes, that timeline is key.
It's making the theological point crystal clear. Holiness cannot dwell with rebellion. God packed his bags and left first. The Babylonians just knocked down an empty house.
That is precisely it. The catastrophic event was theological before it was ever political. The spiritual reality preceded the physical destruction.
Wow.
But the true tragedy of this era is how the leadership responded to these warnings. You would think that prophets shouting in the streets would cause some introspection.
You would hope so.
But 2 Chronicles 36 gives us this devastating summary of the era. It says, the leaders and the people mocked the messengers of God, despised his words, and scoffed at his prophets.
Yeah.
They didn't just ignore them, they actively ridiculed the very life preservers being thrown to them.
See, here's where it gets really interesting, though. That passage in 2 Chronicles ends with a phrase that literally gave me chills when I was reading through the source material. It says they mocked the prophets until there was no remedy.
Until there was no remedy.
Now let's parse that out. Does this mean God just ran out of power to fix them? Or did he just run out of patience? Because from a secular perspective, or maybe to a skeptic listening right now, this might just look like a deity throwing a cosmic temper tantrum because people didn't listen to him.
It's a vital distinction, and it touches on the very nature of divine justice. Until there was no remedy absolutely does not mean God lacked the power to save them.
Okay.
It means the people had completely and totally exhausted all ordinary means of warning and correction. The mechanism here isn't a deity losing his temper. It's a society crossing an event horizon of moral decay.
An event horizon.
Yes, God's patience is immense, as the text notes repeatedly throughout the Old Testament, but it is not indefinite.
So it's not like a battery running out of juice. It's more like a structural support beam in a building. The rot goes so deep for so long that eventually collapse isn't a punishment you inflict. It's just the inevitable physics of what happens next.
That's a perfect way to visualize it.
The spiritual cancer had spread so far that treatment was no longer an option.
Exactly. Divine patience can be refused for so long that judgment becomes the only unavoidable reality. The fall of Judah wasn't a sudden flash of divine anger. It was the final, inevitable consequence of a hardened heart.
Yeah.
When you continually abuse mercy, when you continuously mock the truth, you eventually reach a state where you are completely immune to correction. You lose the capacity to even recognize the truth. That is what no remedy means. It's a terrifying state of being.
That is incredibly sobering. This entire historical event acts as a mirror, really, reflecting some severe truths about the nature of God and the nature of humanity.
It holds up a mirror we don't always want to look into.
No, we definitely don't. Now, the source material does something really helpful here. It outlines 6 core theological principles that emerged directly from the rubble of 586 BC, and I want us to walk through them because they reframe everything we've talked about so far. They take the history and distill it into theology.
These principles are the interpretive key to understanding why this event matters beyond just the annals of ancient history. They explain the mechanics of the divine-human relationship.
Okay, so let's get into it.
The first principle we see is that God's holiness is not negotiable.
Which means it has real historical consequences. I think modern people often think of holiness as just a moral standard, like being a really good person or obeying the rules.
Right, like a static attribute.
But the text explicitly says it is also a fire. If God is love, as we so often emphasize, why is this fiery, destructive holiness necessary?
Because true love cannot be indifferent to evil.
Ah, that's good.
If you love someone, you hate the disease that is destroying them. Holiness is the moral atmosphere of God's dwelling. Think of it like oxygen. If you breathe it as it's intended, it gives life. But if you corrupt it, if you turn it into carbon monoxide through sin and rebellion, it becomes lethal.
That makes a lot of sense.
The Lord who chose Zion, the mountain of Jerusalem, is the exact same Lord who judges Zion when it becomes polluted. Holiness isn't symbolic decor that you can just hang on the wall. It is a consuming reality.
Mm-hmm.
God is patient, but he is never morally indifferent to sin, especially when it involves the exploitation of the vulnerable.
Which flows naturally into the second principle. Covenant privilege increases accountability.
Yes.
Judah had absolutely everything. They had the Davidic covenant, they had the magnificent temple, they had a direct line to the prophets, the law given to Moses, the cultural memory of the Exodus. But as we learned with the talisman concept, proximity to holy things does not equal safety.
It actually equates to greater danger if it's misused.
Yeah.
The principle here is that the more light you receive, the more accountable you are for how you walk in it.
Privilege is not immunity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you give a tricycle to a toddler and they crash it, it's a scraped knee. If you give a high-performance sports car to a teenager and they crash it, it's a catastrophe.
And Judah had the sports car.
Judah was given the spiritual sports car. This is a foundational biblical theme. Those closest to the holy are held to the highest standard. To whom much is given, much is required.
And when that standard is repeatedly broken over centuries, you get the third principle. Judgment is both punitive and revelatory.
Yes.
It punishes, yes, but it also exposes.
This raises an important question, though. What exactly is being exposed?
Well, what do the sources say?
Judgment pulls back the curtain to show what idolatry really does to a society. It shows that spiritual corruption inevitably leads directly to political and social collapse. The judgment of 586 BC wasn't random violence falling from the sky. It was the unveiling of moral reality. What the people had already done to their covenant relationship in secret was suddenly made visible in historical, physical form in public.
So judgment here isn't just God slamming a gavel in a courtroom and handing out a sentence. It's God holding up a mirror to the society and saying, this is what your choices actually look like in the physical world. Like, you wanted a society without my laws. You wanted to exploit the poor and worship gods of power and fertility. Here's what a society without my protection looks like. It looks like Babylon knocking down your walls. It's cause and effect on a cosmic scale.
A cosmic scale indeed, which connects perfectly to the next principle the sources highlight. Principle E exile is Edenic expulsion.
Oh, this one. The loss of Jerusalem in 586 BC mirrors the original loss of Eden in Genesis.
Yes.
I found that parallel absolutely fascinating. I had never put that together.
Yeah.
Eden was lost through rebellion, and Jerusalem was lost through rebellion.
Symmetry is highly intentional. Both involve the catastrophic loss of sacred space. Both involve the rupture of divine presence. Both involve humanity being pushed eastward, away from blessing, and into the wilderness.
Pushed eastward, that's a great detail.
Exile is the biblical vocabulary for demonstrating that sin always, inevitably, displaces humans from the place of communion with God. Whether it is Adam and Eve leaving the garden or Zedekiah being dragged to Babylon, the spiritual mechanics are identical.
But, and this is a massive but, it's not the end of the story. The sources provide this crucial caveat in the final principle. The Davidic promise survives.
This is where the profound, enduring hope enters the narrative. The judgment is incredibly severe. The visible throne is empty. Zedekiah is blinded in Babylon. The temple is ashes.
Right, it looks like it's all over.
It looks hopeless. But the covenant itself, the promise God made, is not dead. The line of David is humbled. It is brought down to a stump, but it is not erased. God preserves a remnant. The promise points forward, looking beyond the ashes of 586 BC to a future king who will actually succeed where the human kings failed.
And to truly understand the weight of that promise and the weight of 586 BC in general, we have to zoom all the way out.
And really do.
We can't just look at this as one isolated event in ancient history. Our sources provide this incredible 10-step biblical arc, tracing the grand narrative from the very beginning in Eden all the way to eternity.
It's a massive timeline.
I want us to trace this thread because it shows how this one horrific year fits into the entire timeline of existence. How does the architecture of history actually work according to these texts?
The arc starts with the blueprint. Step 1 is creation, representing eternity past. God created a world ordered for communion, holiness, and stewardship. Humanity was made to dwell with God in perfect harmony. The original design was a temple cosmos where heaven and earth overlapped perfectly.
But then the fracture happens, the fall. Sin brings alienation. It leads to the disintegration of that original design. Humanity is exiled from the garden.
Which necessitates a rescue plan. Step 3. God initiates the covenant. He forms a people, Israel. He gives them the law, the land, and very clear promises.
Like in Deuteronomy.
Yes, as outlined in Deuteronomy 28, there are explicit blessings for obedience and explicit curses for disobedience. The covenant was designed to create a mini Eden in the land of Israel, a place where God's presence could dwell among humanity again.
And that leads to step 4, redemption and the kingdom era. God delivers Israel from Egypt, the Davidic kingdom is established, the temple is built. It looks like the plan is working. But the human kings, as we've seen with the long road to disaster, repeatedly fail. The rot sets in.
Which brings us right back to step 5, the definitive pivot point of our deep dive, the exile. 586 BC. This is the definitive judgment event in Israel's history.
It's the turning point.
It is the undoing of the Exodus. Instead of being delivered from a foreign empire, they are handed over to one. The people are scattered, the temple is destroyed, and exile becomes the dominant theological condition of the people.
But the prophets who warned of the exile didn't just preach doom. They also preached step 6, restoration. They promised a return from Babylon, a rebuilding of the temple, and a new covenant.
And historically, they do return after 70 years.
Right. Ezra and Nehemiah rebuild the walls. But as the text notes, the deeper problem, the heart problem, the spiritual cancer was still there. The physical restoration was partial, but the spiritual restoration hadn't happened yet.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the messianic climax. Step 7. If we connect this historical reality to the bigger theological picture, Jesus Christ is presented as the true answer to the fall of Judah.
Oh, this is the best part.
Think about the profound symmetry here. Jesus enters the exact same physical city of Jerusalem hundreds of years later. And what does he do?
He weeps.
He weeps over it, as recorded in Luke 19, recognizing its impending judgment because they have once again missed the time of their visitation. He is rejected by its leaders, and ultimately, he is crucified outside its walls.
He literally bears the curse of the exile on behalf of the people.
Yes.
He is cast out of the city. He experiences the withdrawal of the Father's presence on the cross. He is the faithful king where all of Judah's human kings, from Solomon to Zedekiah, ultimately failed. The ashes of Jerusalem literally become the theological soil for the ultimate redemption story. It's breathtaking when you see the threads connect.
Precisely. He is the true temple that is destroyed and rebuilt in 3 days. And that historical reality gives birth to step 8, the church era.
A new people.
A new people called to holiness, faithfulness, and mission. And crucially, based on our sources, a people who are explicitly warned not to make the exact same mistake of presumption that Judah made. They are warned not to treat grace as a talisman.
Because the next reality on the horizon, step 9, is final judgment. The text argues that 586 BC was just a preview, a localized historical shadow of a universal reality.
A warning shot.
The sources state that if Jerusalem, the very city of God, could fall under covenant judgment because of its corruption, then absolutely no human security, no modern institution, can withstand the final day when God evaluates all things.
And finally, the arc resolves in step 10, the millennium and new creation, returning us to eternity. It's the final horizon where God dwells with his people forever. The book of Revelation describes a city where there is no temple because God himself is the temple.
No more sin, no more exile, no more burning buildings, perfect communion restored. It is perfectly symmetrical. The architecture of the narrative is just stunning. So what does this all mean for us? When you have a story this massive, spanning thousands of years, people are bound to misinterpret it.
Oh, there are a lot of misconceptions.
Our sources dedicate a whole section to debunking common misunderstandings about 586 BC. Let's clear the record, and I'll play the role of the skeptic here. Let's do some rapid-fire myth-busting, but let's actually explain the mechanics behind the answers.
Sounds good. I'm ready.
Myth number 1. If Jerusalem fell, God failed his promises. A skeptic would say, he promised to protect them, and he didn't. He broke his word.
Fact. He kept his word perfectly.
How so?
The covenant established back in Deuteronomy explicitly promised curses for disobedience alongside the blessings for obedience. It was a conditional arrangement. Judgment doesn't cancel covenant faithfulness, it actually demonstrates it.
Oh, I see.
If a judge lets a criminal go free despite the law, the judge is unfaithful to the law. God did exactly what he warned he would do. His judgment was the proof of his integrity.
Okay, myth number 2. The fall was only a political or military disaster. Babylon was just too strong, Nebuchadnezzar was a military genius, and Judah was just a small pawn in a geopolitical game.
Fact. Babylon was merely the instrument. Yes, Nebuchadnezzar was powerful, but the root cause of the collapse was spiritual rebellion and covenant unfaithfulness.
So it was spiritual first.
The biblical text is entirely clear that God handed Judah over. Babylon was the axe, but God was swinging it. The military defeat was just the outward symptom of an inward spiritual death.
Got it. Myth number 3, and this is one I could see a lot of people wrestling with today. The destruction of the temple means the temple was always useless. It was a bad idea from the start to try and put God in a box.
Fact. The temple was profoundly holy and significant. It was designed by God. Its destruction didn't prove it lacked original value, it proved that it had been defiled and misused as a talisman.
Like a hospital analogy, right?
Yeah, exactly. A hospital's a good thing, but if the doctors start intentionally infecting patients, you shut the hospital down. The temple was meant for communion, but it was being used to shelter disobedience.
Makes total sense. Myth number 4. Exile means God is totally absent. He just packed up, left the building in Ezekiel's vision, and abandoned them to the Babylonians.
Fact. God is highly active in the exile. He is not absent, he is holy. While the people are in Babylon, God is actively judging. He is actively preserving a remnant, and he's actively speaking through prophets like Ezekiel and Daniel right there in the heart of the pagan empire.
So he went with them into the fire.
His presence wasn't restricted to a zip code in Jerusalem. He was with the faithful remnant in the fire.
And finally, myth number 5, and this is a massive one for modern readers. Because of Christ, because of the New Testament, these ancient fiery warnings from the Old Testament just don't apply to us anymore. It's ancient history. We have grace now.
Fact. The gospel actually intensifies the call to repentance.
Intensifies it.
Yes. The New Testament church is continually warned against covenant presumption. The Apostle Paul writes in Romans, looking back at Israel, that if God did not spare the natural branches, he won't spare you either. The modern church must learn from Judah's fall. We cannot write off ancient judgments as irrelevant. The moral laws of the universe, the unyielding holiness of God, these things have not changed.
Wow.
Grace isn't a license to sin. It's the power to overcome it.
We've established that the warnings still apply. The mechanics of the universe haven't shifted. So I want to speak directly to you, the listener, right now. If you're listening to this and thinking, well, I don't worship statues and I don't sacrifice to fertility gods, so I'm good. Let's bring it closer to home. How does a story from 586 BC change how you operate tomorrow morning?
It changes everything.
The sources break down the practical implications into a few key areas. Let's start with Christian life and daily living.
The primary application here is relentless, honest self-examination. You must continually examine your heart. The danger of 586 BC is that the people thought they were fine.
They felt secure.
Do not mistake a religious heritage, or going through the motions on a Sunday, or institutional belonging for true faithfulness. Judah had all the heritage in the world, and it didn't save them. The text urges us to repent quickly and not harden our hearts, because we've seen exactly where a hardened heart leads. It leads to mocking the warning signs until there is no remedy.
What about for leadership? Because Zedekiah's failure wasn't just personal. When he fell, when he made those corrupt compromises, he took a whole nation down with him, including his own children.
For leadership, whether you lead a company, a family, or a church, the lesson is that you are not just an administrator. You are a moral steward.
A moral steward.
Your compromises don't just affect you. The collateral damage of corrupt leadership is massive. It shapes the destiny and can literally ruin the lives of entire communities. Leading with integrity, transparency, and the fear of God is paramount because leaders are held to that higher standard of accountability we discussed earlier.
And for ministry and discipleship, how does a modern institution avoid becoming the Jerusalem of 586 BC?
Ministries must preach both warning and grace. You cannot just preach a comfortable, consumer-friendly message. You have to form hearts that actually love God, not just minds that memorize theology or attend events.
Right. It can't just be an intellectual exercise.
Success in ministry isn't about having impressive buildings, massive budgets, or huge crowds if obedience and justice are lacking behind closed doors. An impressive building with corrupt leadership is just a modern talisman waiting to collapse. You have to help people identify and dismantle their modern idols.
I really want to press into that word idols for a second. As I said earlier, it's easy to point at ancient people worshiping golden statues and think we are so much more enlightened today. But what do false temples of security actually look like for someone listening right now? What is the modern equivalent of chanting the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord?
A false temple is anything, absolutely anything you trust more than God himself for your ultimate security, significance, or safety. It can be your wealth, your meticulously managed retirement account. It can be a political system, a specific political party, or a charismatic leader you think will save the country.
I see a lot of that.
Oh, constantly. It can be your institutional affiliations, your career trajectory, or even your own moral self-righteousness. If you are trusting in those things to keep you safe, to give your life meaning, while ignoring the actual commands of God to love your neighbor and seek justice, you are treating those things like a talisman.
That's a gut punch.
You are standing in the middle of a burning building chanting, "I have a great 401k," while living in a rebellion to the truth.
We've covered incredible ground today. We started with the terrifying, brutal reality of the siege of 586 BC, where the massive walls were breached, the temple was torched, and the Davidic line were shattered in the most traumatic way imaginable.
It was a heavy journey.
It was. We walked through the deep spiritual rot, the social injustice, and the syncretism that rotted Judah from the inside out, turning their sacred spaces into empty talismans. We looked at the unyielding, fiery holiness of God, who will not be manipulated by our empty rituals, and who patiently, persistently warns us until there is no remedy.
A sobering phrase.
And finally, we traced the incredible, sweeping narrative arc from Eden to eternity, finding our hope not in a building, but in a new kingdom built from those very ashes through the Messiah, who bore the ultimate exile so we wouldn't have to.
The narrative of 586 BC is not an easy one. It forces us to confront deeply uncomfortable truths about human nature and divine justice, but it also grounds our hope in something far more secure than brick and mortar, or political power, or temporary wealth. And it leaves us with a necessary probing question about our own foundations.
Exactly. The mirror is turned toward us now. So we want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over as you go about your week, something to deeply consider based on everything we've unpacked from these ancient texts. If every outward symbol of your security, your job, your affiliations, your bank account, your social standing, your religious routines, if all of it was stripped away tomorrow, just like the walls of Jerusalem were reduced to ash, what would remain of your actual internal foundation? Are you building your life on a talisman, or are you building on truth? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.